this going. Hi guys, my name is Rob Shellman. I'm the founder for Better Beer Society, and welcome to Series 3 of our Brown Bag Blind Tasting event. Cheers. Cheers, guys. So I created this series as a way to put the showcase back on the beer, more of the focus on the beer. This event isn't really about labels. It's not about finding the holy grail of rare beers. It's really about tasting openly, tasting blindly, experiencing that beer that's in front of you at this moment, just really being in the moment. So as we keep going today, I ask you to really maybe throw those perceptions about what a certain beer style should taste like out the window. Just really focus on the beer, and I think you're going to be in for a really fun ride today. So, speaking of rides or trips, did I mention we're giving away 2 round-trip tickets to Belgium today? Pretty cool. We'll be chatting with the winner after the event, and we'll go over all those details with you. And we've got a fun video in store for you later too. But yeah, it's gonna be a lot of fun. That's not to say we don't have a lot of treats in store for you. We do. You're gonna be tasting some truly outstanding representations of that style today. So just again, think about that beer. Think about those intended flavors and aromas as they're presented to you. I really have to give a huge thank you to Duvel USA and Sean Wolf for believing in this event and really having the budget to front such a cool prize for y'all. So let's give it up for Duvel USA too. But also a huge thanks to all the distributors and importers who have helped me with this. I truly appreciate all your efforts in making these BBS events such a success. You guys bring us world-class beers and truly are passionate about them, so thank you. The one last thing I wanted to mention too is as our beer scene continues to grow, I mean we're gonna find ourselves with many options. Oftentimes they're gonna be on the same day. In fact, it's going down today. Surly Fest is happening. But I just really wanted each of you to know that I appreciate your choice in being here today. So thank you so much. Cheers to you guys. Okay, so Belgium. Had the opportunity to go there for my birthday last year. It goes without saying, it's an incredible country. I've always appreciated Belgian styles, but I never really fell in love with them until I was actually immersed in what is just a fascinating beer culture. But I've only been there once. So with that said, I'm gonna go ahead and introduce our first guest speaker who's been there many times. And ladies and gentlemen, we are in the presence of royalty. I want to present to you Minnesota's only beer knight, Sir Lanny Huff.
Technically, I'm not royalty, and in no way am I royalty whatsoever. I'm going to apologize to you guys because you're going to see my back a lot. It's my best side. So, and I'd say that with all modesty. So what is this whole royalty thing all about? Well, there's an organization called the Chevalier de Brasseurs de Fourquette. Chevalier de Brasseurs de Fourquette. And what that means is the knighthood of the brewer's mash staff, which it sounds better in French. And what it is, it's an organization of brewers, people that sell Belgian beer, and in my case, I'm what's known as an associate member or an associate knight. They call it, actually I've got a little plaque that calls me a beer knight. And I'm humble about it, trust me. It's in recognition of my career, which started in 1994 with a small company in Minneapolis, an import company, and I've been working in importing Belgian beers since 1994. It's been the only thing that I do. I'm the only importer located in the Twin Cities. Our offices are in Austin, Texas. But I live here, and some of you have probably seen me around. I get around a little bit, as much as I possibly can. So what we are is an import company, and what importers do, and this is something that's a source of some, and by the way, Pat is going to be going around and collecting those little cards. That was not a useless exercise. He's going to be grabbing those up, and I'm going to go through them in a little bit. So let me describe to you how Belgian beer comes to you. And I'm not talking about Belgian style beer. I'm talking about beers from Belgium. Basically what will happen is we'll be approached by a brewery, or we'll find a brewery in our travels, and we'll say, how would you feel about doing some business in the States? And they say, great, or not. And once we build a relationship with them, we enter into a partnership. So we're their agent in the States. Every beer that I import, and several of them you're going to be tasting today, although I guess the whole point of this is I don't tell you what they are. But you'll be tasting some of the beers that I do today. So the way that beer comes to market is something that people are commonly interested in. We'll partner up with a distributor in the States. We partner up with a supplier. We call them suppliers, and we call the beers products, and it's all very sterile. So if you hear me call anything a product, from now on, I want you to make some noise. So if I refer to any of these fantastic handmade beers that you're tasting today as a product, remind me, it's not a Q-tip. No one here sells Q-tips, do they? Okay, good. I did that once. I made a joke about office supplies, and it was like half the people in the room were actually working for Office Max or something, and it didn't go well from there. So the beers that we bring in, we'll buy them, physically take title of the beers. Thank you, Pat. Physically take title of the beers, and then we have a warehouse in New Jersey, another warehouse in California, and we will fill orders to distributors. And you've heard of the three-tier law, and that's in effect everywhere in America. The distributors buy the beers from us, retailers buy the beer from the distributor, you buy the beer from the retailers. And that's how it works. So it's a very straightforward thing. Now, it seems like a lot of middle people, and I take that on board with all due respect. But these people are all necessary in our system. They're all there for a reason, and we wouldn't have the vibrant selection of Belgian beers that we have in the States without all of these people working. And we could talk about the three-tier system some other time. Maybe we'll do that later. But that's the way it works in the States to bring these beers to market. Let's talk a little bit. I had you write down some questions, and I can't wait to get to them. I wish I'd had a chance to do that a little bit earlier, but I've got a couple of things I want to go through. Let's talk about Belgium. Let's talk about how Belgium is the same and different as the United States. First of all, it starts with a little tiny cup of snack mix. When you go to Belgium and you go to a good place that has a lot of respect for you as a customer and for the beer and for the culture, when you order a beer, a couple of things happen, and the little tiny cup of snack mix will tell you right away that you're in a different place. So this is how it goes. You sit down at a little table in a little patio anywhere in Belgium on any given day. The weather's like this. If the weather was this nice in Belgium, that patio would be totally full by now. And it would be full with people of all kinds. There'd be all kinds of people there. And when you order a beer, several things happen. First of all, the beer is served in the proper glass. The beer comes with a little tiny bit of snack mix, which is an echo of the role that beer plays in Belgium. Beer is in Belgium what wine is in Italy and France. In fact, we're bringing a beer in soon that the style of beer, when we asked the brewer, what style of beer is this? He said, it's gastronomic. So, okay, what does that mean? I don't know what that style is. It's gastronomic. It's gastronomic. I said, well, can you describe to me what that means to you? He said, it is for with food and people. Okay, so there's our hint. That little bowl of snack mix gives you a hint that it's not just about chugging down beers. Some of you have heard this story before, but I think it's good enough for me to say it again. The very first time I was in Belgium, I was 26 years old. I was sitting at a little patio, just the way I described it, in a little town in the northern part of Belgium, and I was with one of our brewmasters. And we sat there, and I'm just blown away. I was in Belgium for the first time. It was my first day. I was jet lagged, but I was happy. We sit down, and he said, what beer would you like? And I said, to be honest with you, the first Belgian beer I ever tasted was Duvel. So I think it's fitting, even though I don't sell it, that I should try a Duvel. Excellent idea. So we both ordered Duvels. We ordered Duvels from the waiter who came by. And the waiter came back a few minutes later, and he had a tray with 2 glasses filled with Duvel, 2 empty bottles, and these little trays of snack mix. And he set it down, and he started giving us the beers. And my brewmaster friend, Stan, he said, what is this beer? And the waiter said, I'm sorry, sir, it's Duvel. How do I know it's Duvel? I didn't see you pour it out of the bottle. How long ago did you pour that beer? Is that in fact what I ordered? I don't know that. Please try again. So as an American, 26 years old, I was freaking thirsty for one thing. It's like, dude, you sent my beer back. What's that all about? And he said, Lanny, it's important that you learn this today. For the rest of your life, you need to understand this. That beer was made by people with great care. That beer was made by people that have been doing this for generations. That beer deserves better treatment than that. It's like, wow, it didn't seem like it was bad treatment to me. It's a branded glass. The whole thing seemed like it was a pretty good presentation. And he said, we deserve, as beer drinkers, we deserve to be given the whole show. So the server came back, he opened the bottles in front of us, poured it into the glass perfectly, left the bottle behind. Our little snack mixes were still there, so I was happy about that. And it's something that's resonated with me every time I've been to Belgium, and every time I drink a Belgian beer, I think of that. I think of the role beer plays in Belgium for these people. It's not as much a medication as it is a cultural pipeline. Another story that I like to tell to kind of describe this whole thing is on that same trip, my first trip to Belgium, I was in another little town square on a Sunday, and church got out. And you know, the bells were ringing and the doors are flung open, and the pastors, I don't know if they're pastors, but the pastor was shaking everybody's hand as they went out. And this group of little old ladies, like every church I've ever been to, there's always a group of little old ladies that kind of hang out. My grandma was in one, and she used to go downstairs and drink coffee. Whose grandmother drank coffee in church instead of beer? No, none of you. Well, my grandmother would go downstairs and drink coffee, but I'm watching this unfold. This group of little old ladies in their 70s, 80s, 90s tottered across the square, sat down at a cafe, and they ordered beer. Every single one of them ordered a beer, and they didn't order the same types of beer. So these two events, these two things happened to me at the same time on the same trip. And I was blown away with how different things were in Belgium. And now I look for those differences. I look for what's different, how do they treat beer in Belgium versus the way we do it in the United States. And these are hints about how beer fits in. Okay, so as I've traveled in Belgium, and as we've kind of talked about Belgian beer in the States, one of the things that we've tried to do is make sure that the very minimum of service is done. And they do that here. They use the glasses whenever possible to serve the right glass. That's point one. Point two, treat it with respect. That's important above all else. And the concept of craft beer in Belgium is different than the concept we have here. There is no sort of separation between craft beer and what we consider normal beer. Everybody's kind of in the flow all the time with that. So you can sit at a table and there'll be a couple of people drinking Pilsner. And by the way, I hate to say it, but in Belgium, Pilsner is the most popular style of beer consumed, just like everywhere else in the world. So the craft beer in Belgium is a sideline for most of these people. And consumers are used to having choices that are very limited. Now, I'm struggling with this. How many people here have been to Belgium, first of all? Okay, quite a few of you. Quite a few, that's great. So I'm struggling with how to, we've got a wide range of folks here that are, we're going to have to get to these questions that I had you write down. But I'm struggling with how much of this we need to go into. But let's talk about Belgium as kind of a construct. Belgium had its first day of independence in 1831. Before that, Belgium was a part of Holland. So when you talk about the styles of this area, Holland and Belgium are very much tied together. After Belgium independence is when we started seeing Belgian culture really emerge in a big way. Belgium is broken down into basically three big regions, and a fourth one is also added in when we talk about it, and maybe even a fifth, depending on who you talk to in Belgium. Wallonia is the French-speaking part, and that's generally speaking in the south and east. Most of the beers we get are not from Wallonia. They're in fact from Flanders, which is the north and west part of the country. Brussels is considered to be its own thing, and Brussels is the capital of the European Union, so there's lots of people going through there all the time, and it's the capital of Belgium. And then there's another vaguely Germanic area called Limburgs, which you're going to be seeing. Limburgs has been the final frontier for Belgian beer. You haven't seen a lot of beers come into the States from Limburg, but it's going to be happening now. You're going to start seeing more of them. That's a region that is heavily influenced by its border with Germany. So when we look at Belgium as a brewing culture, it is considered to be one of the primary brewing cultures in the world, along with Germany, along with Britain. Those three kind of influences are the main three types of beer that are going on. And I want to talk a little bit about what makes them separate and different. In Germany, beers in general are all about the ingredients. They're all about malt and hops and water. The beers there, as you know, from drinking, German beer, it comes across as being very straightforward. The flavor of malt, the flavor of hops, they're easy to identify, they're easy to pick out. And the differences between brewery to brewery, if the style is the same, a Pilsner from one is going to be very similar to a Pilsner from the other. It's very organized, it's very direct. It flows naturally, it's predictable. It is comfortable to drink beer in Germany because you never really have to go out of your comfort zone. Britain is much the same way, but there's a slightly different angle in the beer that comes out of Britain. Sure, malt and hops are important, but yeast starts to play a little bit more of a role in Britain than it does in Germany. I mean, yeast is important for all fermentations. We all know how beer is made, right? Everybody knows how beer is made? Yes? If you don't, that's not a big deal. In fact, do a little research on it. It's good to know that. But in Britain, there's a slight little more focus on the yeast because of the way fermentations are done, a little higher temperature. And I would argue that these two things come together, these two traditions come together in Belgium, and there's nothing more important in Belgium than yeast. Andrew Schmidt, can you raise your hand, Andrew? Do you guys all know him, by the way? I'm sorry to call you out like this. He is fighting for Sunday sales in Minnesota, people. If you get a chance, grab a card from them and try to support what they're doing. It's the only way that Sunday sales are going to happen in Minnesota is if it comes from consumers, because no one else has any reason to want that to take place. So by all means, stop going to Hudson and buy beer locally. Wouldn't that be nice? So Andrew actually sent me an email before this thing asking me to get into a little bit about yeast. Well, I'm not going to get too technical about any of the brewing things because it's been a long time since I brewed a beer. And as I pointed out to him, all of our Belgian partners are very scared about telling us exactly how the beers are made. And that gets into the culture of Belgian brewing, which is very secretive. If you run a brewery that's been in the same organization, the same family for 7 generations, you're entitled to some secrets. But yeast is the most important thing. All things being equal, yeast is the ingredient that makes Belgian beer the way it tastes. Now, the first beer that you had is what's known as a table beer, and I know I'm not supposed to say the name of the beer, but I do know what it is, and it's an excellent example of how much flavor you can get out of a beer that's fairly low in alcohol. And this is the style of beer that relies heavily on yeast to give it the flavor that you're experiencing. If you go brewery to brewery in Belgium, most breweries in Belgium use one strain of yeast to make their beer. This is the strain of yeast that they've developed over time. It's the most important thing to them. To protect that yeast, most brewers will use a different yeast in bottle conditioning. So most beers from Belgium, if you're a home brewer, this is important to know. If you culture the yeast in the bottle, no matter what the brewery tells you, by the way, let's back up to that secretive thing again. They're not going to tell you necessarily the absolute truth about this, but I will. Most of the time, the vast majority of the beers that you get in the States, bottle conditioned Belgian beers, the yeast used in bottle conditioning is not the same. There's no risk in the brewery because it's bottled, it's capped, and it's put in a warm room, and that's the only thing it ever sees. They'll never introduce another yeast strain into the brewery because they're afraid of contamination. But for bottle conditioning, it doesn't matter as much. The character of the beer is already set, so they put a different kind of yeast in there just to generate the CO2. All of the brewers that we work with keep samples of their yeast on hand to keep it healthy, and they also keep it in 3 or 4 other places around the world. And I asked them about them. I said, "What, around the world? Like where?" Well, the United States. At the Siebel Institute is one place where they do it in Chicago. And we have one in Asia and one in Africa. So they're basically hitting all the continents. I said, "Well, what's the story with that?" And he said, "Imagine Europe is leveled in another world war." These are the way they think, man. It's like, Imagine Europe is leveled in a world war. We could start brewing again as soon as we got equipment because we have the yeast. The yeast is the most important thing. So that's, if you remember nothing else, and I think my colleagues that are coming after me will talk more about the specifics of the technical part of brewing, but yeast is what gives beer its absolute character. Now, I'm going to get into your questions in a minute, but I want to talk a little bit about the real differences between Belgium and the United States. In the United States, and if I'm wrong, I want you to, if this is very quiet, you've only had the one little weak beer, it'd almost be better if we all had shots before we did this, because I want you to be, well, that's kind of counter to the whole thing though, isn't it? Well, I want you to be comfortable to shout something out if you need to. But in the United States, and I consider myself a fairly typical beer drinker, I drink as much beer as I can and still remain alive. And when I say that, what I mean is not necessarily quantity, although from time to time we do challenge ourselves, but also I love trying different beers. I try beers from everywhere all the time, every day. And that is, I would say, at the heart of what makes you guys go too, right? I mean, what's new? What's new? What's new? I want to try what's new. I want to try what's different. I'm looking for new flavors. This is not at all the way a Belgian beer drinker historically has interacted with beer. You know that old joke, I think it's Saturday Night Live, or it's like when England, they give you a spoon when you're it's your spoon for life. If you lose it, you don't have a spoon. In Belgium, you get a beer for life. A lot of people drink the beers that their dads drank, or their mothers, or their uncles, or whatever, and they just drink that beer constantly. So the craft beer scene over there is very different than it is here. On top of kind of the preference, they don't have a preference for trying new beers all the time. And it's actually a real stumbling block for us doing business, because they'll say, well, can't you get a permanent draft line for our beers everywhere? I said, absolutely not. That's not going to work. And the reason it won't work is that American beer consumers will not allow it. You need to have something new for people all the time. But in Belgium, it's not unusual, and I've seen it. There's a little bar in Brussels, and I can't remember how to pronounce it, but I think it's Estaminet. I think it's Estaminet. And that woman has had the same beer list without any exception at all every time I've been to Belgium for the last 18 years. She's never changed it. There's no reason to. Her customers are coming to drink their beer, the one they love, in that place with her. It's the most characterful place in the world. It's called a brown cafe. And if you ever hear that phrase and someone says, talks about brown cafe, get yourself to a brown cafe. These are the little family-owned, independent places that are all over Belgium and Holland, and they are full of character. They don't always smell good, but they're great places to drink beer, and you will still get the respect for the beer that you deserve. You'll get the right glass, it'll be served at the right temperature, and if you know the woman, I wish I remembered her name, if you know her there, you can get West Fletchern from her, just on the down low. It's like, if you really get in with her, but if you ask for it, forget it. It's not gonna happen. You can't just ask for it. You gotta kind of get in there with her a little bit and make her feel good. So American beer drinkers are looking for variety, trying new things, wanting to have new experiences. Belgian beer drinkers are looking for reliability. They're looking for comfort. They're looking for an everyday beer that they've really relied on for a long time. Now, why is that? Why is it that way? Why are they so vastly different? I would argue the reason for that is in Belgium, most bars are tied houses. So when you go into a bar, it's generally owned by a brewery. And that's a big difference between the United States, where that is specifically forbidden, and Belgium. So if you own, say, InBev, and you own a bar, the beers that are going to be served there overwhelmingly will be InBev beers. So there's a built-in stability that comes along with that, and that crushes mercilessly the way you want to drink beer, because you're not going to get variety. You're not going to get it. It's just not going to happen. And this is no small number of pubs. This is 95% or more of all pubs in Belgium are oriented this way. So the real independents that are popping up, and there are more independents popping up all the time, and we'll get to that in a minute, but the real independents that have variety and selection are being slammed. If you had any sort of hope of owning a bar in your life, go to Belgium and open a specialty beer bar. People are really thirsty for it. Now, why are they thirsty for it now? There are two things I want to say to that. American beer drinkers have influenced Belgium beer culture in a very strong way. A lot of Belgian brewers would say the only reason that my brewery continues to produce beer at all is that Americans have somehow glommed onto this and enjoy it. Cantillon would probably be one of those. Who's familiar with Cantillon, the sour beer? Yeah, right on. It's a small family-run place, very small, and they were almost dead. And the beer started coming into the States, and now, those of you that have tried to buy it, like Al, can you get it ever? No, hardly ever, right? Al is the bar manager over at the Blue Nile, by the way. Everybody give Al a round of applause. I'm sorry to call you out, Al, but if we talk about Belgian beer in the Twin Cities, we have to talk about Al a little bit, because despite any sort of, what shall I say, how do I put this? Despite numerous hurdles, Al has been a supporter of great Belgian beer as long as I've been in the business. I just can't imagine the scene without him. And after they open at 4, so when you get done here, run on down there and have a couple of Belgian beers. I hope you have some on tap right now. Indeed. Okay, good. No, not Indeed Brewing Company, but Indeed you have Belgian beers. All right. So, you know, the Tied House thing has kept Belgium from changing the way the United States has. But American beer drinkers, as they go to Belgium, as they demand variety, they're having an impact. Particularly in Brussels, you'll see a lot more of these independent cafes. So the independent cafes are coming along. If you ever want to start a bar, go to Belgium and do it. You let me know. I'll let you know where the best places to do it would be, but it's a fantastic opportunity. So that's how it's changing in Belgium. The way that we're interacting with beer in the United States is it's like a really quiet, mellow, beautiful tidal wave kind of going all over the earth. The way that we're doing things here is being copied in other places. My friend Rob, just today on his Facebook page, he put a photo of a beer. That hardly ever happens with Rob, as you can imagine, but he put a photo of a beer on that actually we're going to be picking up. So the world's getting smaller. And he didn't know that when he put the beer up there, but the world's getting smaller. Americans are demanding that variety. And what that's doing is it's encouraging brewers and bar owners all over the world to adopt a little bit more of the American way of doing things. Even in Scandinavia, where beer is really expensive, you're seeing more and more and more of these sort of selection-driven places pop up. Really important, really something that's really going on. Now, we'll talk a little bit about, I think Michael and Jeff, you're going to talk a little bit about style, right? You guys have specific style stuff, more or less? Yeah. We didn't have a chance to coordinate that too much. I don't want to talk too much. But the basic Belgian styles have evolved over time in the same way that the way beer is being consumed in Belgium has evolved. It's been a situation where America is having an influence, again, this little mellow tidal wave going all around the world. And on the top of the tidal wave are hops. And it's hops, 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 hops everywhere. And the last time I was in Belgium, I was blown away with how many more low-alcohol hoppy beers there are than there were a year ago. I go once or twice a year. There was a year between visits, but I must have tried 6 new blonde, pale, bitter, hoppy beers that would probably be very at home here. Now that brings up an interesting, this is the problem with this, I could go on all day, and I know you don't want me to. I'm going to get to your questions after this next thing. But the way, how do I describe this? Style development over time. Hoppy beer hasn't been very popular in Belgium until recently. People are starting to take that concept back and forth. What we consider undrinkable, and in fact, the first time I'm going to tell you a story that's humiliating, J-Pat. My friend Patrick is going to like this because I'm going to humiliate myself in front of all of you. When I was in my 20s and getting started in the business, I brewed a bunch of home brews and I brought them to my very first ever business dinner with 3 Belgian brewers that have been doing it for generations. Oh yeah, you get it, right? You can imagine how excited I was to bring beers that I had brewed for them. And we poured the beers out at the table, and I wish I had a flower pot here because that's crucial to the story. We were sitting on a deck, and the guy tried my IPA, and it was really, I thought it was great. I thought it was really good, hoppy IPA. He took a sniff, never tasted it, and just dumped it in the flower pot and set his glass down, didn't say a word. Hardcore. So I, kind of going with the flow, I opened the second one, which is a brown ale, admittedly not my best work. That's how serious these guys were about it. The American styles just didn't do it for them, but that's changing now. These guys with the old way of thinking, oh, hops, forget it. They're not in charge anymore. Hops are coming on strong in that part of the world. Styles are evolving all the time. There's no such thing as a moment in silence when it comes to beer style. The way that beer styles have propagated over time, it's the same everywhere. If someone in town here makes a really good, I don't know, imperial red ale, pretty soon other people are going to start to copy it. And that's the way things have gone. You can go to the heart of the first ever of something, and always someone copying it is the way that it propagates and goes on. I'm going to look at your questions in 1 second, but I would be very lax if I didn't talk a little bit about the Trappists. Trappists are an almost uniquely Belgian thing, and there is one Trappist monastery that makes beer in Holland, and there's one that just opened in Austria. So now there are a total of, I think, eight Trappist breweries. Yeah. Sorry? What's Agnew doing? 8? I can't tell what you said. Oh, yeah, 8. Thank you. There are 8. There are 6 in Belgium, 1 in Holland, and 1 in Austria right now. They're doing this thing. The Trappists are a fundamental Benedictine group that split from the main church in 1664 and decided that things were just too easy as a monk. And they needed to tighten up the ship a little bit. So they formed their own monastery at a place called La Trappe, which is in Normandy. That was the first Trappist monastery. Now, at the heart of Trappists is the idea that they need to, in fact, earn their way in the world through their own labor. So all Trappists do different things, and there are Trappist monasteries everywhere. The headquarters of the Trappist faith in the United States is in Iowa. Those guys make caskets. There's a Trappist monastery in Kentucky that makes fudge. It's true. They actually have bourbon in their fudge, which I think is right on. So Trappists do a lot of different things. They can make cheese, they can make bread, they can do all kinds of things. And the Trappist brewers earn their daily money from the brewing of beer. There are 6 of them, as I said, in Belgium, and there's 1 in Holland, and there's 1 that just formed in Austria, and there's every reason to believe that before it's all over, there'll be a Trappist monastery brewing beer in the United States. There's no reason to think that won't happen. There is no such thing as Trappist style. And does that shock you? Or is this group so savvy that I don't need to go into any detail on that? No such thing as Trappist style. No 2 Trappist monasteries brew beer the same way. There's no such thing. So if you see Trappist, this is a pet peeve of mine. And actually, the owner of New Belgium Brewing Company called me a name once because of this. I was at a conference in Denver, and she overheard that my name was being mentioned. At the time, I was with La Trappe as an importer, and we were suing them to stop calling their beer Trappist. And she gave me an earful about how that was, way to be a part of the beer culture. It's like, sorry, it's not Trappist. You're not a Trappist. You're not from there. For a beer to be called Trappist, it has to be produced within the walls of a Trappist monastery. Monks have to be involved in some way. It is not, in fact, okay for you to call it Trappist just because that's what you want to do. And she didn't really like that response. I haven't talked to Kim since then, but I wish her well. I understand she's having some success with her brewery, despite losing the ability to call one of her beers Trappist. All right, I'm going to look at some of these. Anybody have any questions that they're thinking of right now? Rob, when are you going to start pouring more beer? Is it coming right up? As soon as you're done talking. Oh, great. All right. Oh, what's the key characteristics that differentiate a Belgian-style brew from other popular European styles? Talked about that a little bit. Primarily, it's the role of yeast in fermentation. The yeast is allowed to do its thing and go crazy. Also, there are no limitations in terms of ingredients. If in Belgium you come up with an idea for a beer that incorporates an ingredient that is safe to eat, odds are it will be in a beer at some point or another. In Germany, that's not true. In Germany, by the way, the Reinheitsgebot, the famous malt, hops, yeast, water protectionist thing, that's only true for beer they consume in Germany. I'm not going to name names, but it rhymes with Dreck. If you drink a German beer that rhymes with Dreck, that is not Reinheitsgebot. That has lots of chemicals in it. Sorry, I hope you don't like that beer. What is my favorite characteristic of a Belgian-style beer? My favorite characteristic is once again, it all comes back to yeast. My favorite characteristics of Belgian-style beer are twofold. 1, an interesting nose that comes from the yeast fermentation, and 2, and my second pet peeve about American-style Belgian beer, or American-brewed Belgian-style beer, is it must be fully fermented. And when I say that, what I mean is the sugar the mash, everything about making the beer needs to be done in such a way that it ferments out fully unless the style dictates otherwise. It drives me bonkers when someone tries to do a Duvel or pale golden strong style Belgian beer that still is sweet. It should never be sweet, it should be dry. Can you give an elevator speed of the can you give an elevator speech of the history of Belgian beers? Oh, that's an interesting question. Beer instead of wine. There's your floor. No, I don't mean to throw that away, but the history of Belgian beers, as I said, there was a time in history when people had to drink local. There was no choice because there was no way to get beer around. So what happened in other parts of Europe where grapes could be grown, and wine is a lot more straightforward to make, at least in the most basic concept, than beer will ever be. Problem is, you can't grow very many grapes in northern Germany. You can't grow very many grapes in Britain. Other fermentable things are difficult to grow as well, but barley has lots of different uses. On top of, making beer, you can do other things with it. So what happened as wine was being, cultivated for the market, which is something that happened after the Middle Ages, that's when beer became marketable. Until it was possible to transport beer even a small distance, it was all made locally and consumed locally. So in Belgium, that has stuck around a little bit longer than it did here. Prohibition did a number on our local breweries. Plus, America came to the party late enough where it was possible to get beer around without it going bad. So that's why we haven't had historically the culture of every town has a couple of little breweries. We're getting close now, it seems like. Minneapolis has how many? Michael, how many breweries does Minneapolis have now? I don't even know anymore. We can't keep track. I'm super geeked about that, by the way. I'm really happy about that. The new places opening up are all great. So that's basically the history of Belgian beer is parallel to the history of all packaged alcohol. But because you can grow grain and hops in Belgium and not grapes, that's the why it goes that way. Are there some styles in the mix? Some new styles? Yeah, all the time. Styles are evolving constantly. The best way to store for future use, cork or cap. Now this is the third rail of Belgian beer discussions, isn't it? My opinion, if you want to hold on to beer for a long time, cap. Small bottles and cap. The beer will develop better in that over time, and you'll run into fewer problems with grody beer. How long can I keep a beer without going bad? Now this gets to a whole nother topic, which is that of the best before date. I don't understand how you can put a best before date on beer if you don't know how it's being stored. Best before dates mean virtually nothing when it comes to strong beers that can age over time. Keep your beer dark, keep the temperature stable, preferably on the cool side, and who knows? Once in Belgium, I had a 1976 De Koning, which is a 5.5% alcohol by volume beer that was stunning. I've also had quadruples that were a year old that tasted like boiled corn. So it depends on how it's gone. A favorite city and bar to visit. My favorite bar in Belgium is called the Puchinellenkelder, which is spelled just the way it sounds. And it's in Brussels. It's Puchinellenkelder. It's a nice place. It's in Brussels, right across from Manneken Pis. Favorite city in Belgium is Ghent. If you get a chance to go to one city at all, go to Ghent. It's beautiful. It's got a great vibe, lots of great places to drink beer. And there's a little Genever bar there called Druipelkot. If you remember nothing else, remember Druipelkot. Because the guy that runs the Druipelkot is this grumpy-ass old dude, and he has like 320 different types of Genever. I wish Corey Chauvin was still here, because last time he was there, he bought for the train ride tiramisu-flavored Genever. Now, Genever is kind of like gin, but it's lower in alcohol, and it's not quite as junipery. So if you can imagine a spirit that tastes like tiramisu after we were already drunk on the train, on the way back to Brussels, imagine that mess the next day. I was his roommate. I lived it. I don't have to imagine it. Beer Fest in City, time of year to go to Belgium. Go to Belgium in the summertime. The Beer Fest, the first weekend of September, the weekend of beer, is terrific. There are other ones, the Night of the Great Thirst, which celebrates a lot of sour beers, and that's every other year. That's an excellent one as well. And then there's a annual winter beer festival in, I want to say St. Nicholas, which it's all strong Belgian beers made by family breweries. That's pretty cool too. Are all Belgian beers a variation of the Pilsner style that is a top fermenting beer? No. There's no such thing as, you cannot generalize about Belgian beer. Not all Belgian beers are anything at all. So most Belgian beers are in fact top fermented, but Pilsners are bottom fermented. So Pilsners are the yeast fermentation in a Pilsner is meant to be more neutral than a top fermented fermentation, which will give lots of fruity and estery notes. What defines a Trappist brewery? I think we talked about that. That's a good question. I'm glad I hit that one. What makes Belgian beer so unique? Yeast. This is a good one because whoever wrote this actually put the answer to the question on there. You've got a job. You could be my speechwriter. In Brussels, the best places to go. All right, get your pens out. This is my list. There's a little bar called Toone, Toone, and the most popular beer there is called Kwak, and it's a fabulous place to be treated badly and drink good beer. The aforementioned Puchinellenkelder in Brussels is my favorite beer bar. There's a new one called Motor Lambic, which is very American style. Yeah, Motor Lambic is you will never see any of those beers anywhere else but Motor Lambic. That's another thing about Belgium is you won't see beer outside of its locale, typically speaking. There's a place called A la Bacchus, which is phenomenal. It's the most well-lit bar in the world. Which is a little off-putting, but it does keep the riffraff out, except for when we're there. And they have a style of beer that you can't really get anywhere else called Lambic Doux, which is D-O-U-X. It's basically sweetened lambic. You're going to have a very interesting ride with some sweet beers, some sour beers today, I think. Other places to go, A la Mort Subite, which means sudden death. That's a good place, and you can be treated well there. Oldest brewery still in operation in Belgium? I'm not sure about that. What role do gnomes play in Belgian beer culture? I'll say that again. What role do gnomes play in Belgian beer culture? Well, they invented it. In the forest. No, you've obviously seen a lot of Belgian beers with cartoon characters on it. The reason for that is Belgians are obsessed with cartoons. You see cartoons everywhere all the time. So it's natural for them, we do dogs in this country and craft beer. There's a dog on almost everybody's got a dog on one of their labels. In Belgium, it's gnomes because the culture of cartoons is very strong and people like that. They like to see that. Difference between a double, triple, quadruple. It's not 2, 3, or 4 of anything is the answer. It is in fact the very first double that was made by Westmalle, and it was copied, and everybody called it the same thing because it was working. Triple kind of came out of that as an obvious marketing ploy. And quadruple, the name quadruple was invented in 1992 by La Trappe to describe their dark beers. In terms of the styles themselves, it doesn't mean 2, 3, or 4 of anything, but it does in fact harken back to the day when Belgian brewers would sell their beer, and people couldn't always read. So not like today when almost everybody can. So if you were marketing a beer, there's a challenge. You couldn't put anything on the label to be read because people couldn't read. So what you would do is put a symbol like a red dragon, which is easy. If I say to you, let's go to the Red Dragon, oh, okay, I know where that is. And then 1 cross, 2 cross, 3 crosses, or some other symbol to denote one style from the next. So the naming of these styles does in fact have some historical basis in sort of pre-literate beer drinking, which I'm striving to get back to, by the way. So doubles, in general, a double is going to be moderate in alcohol, between 6 and 7% alcohol by volume. It'll be dark, primarily malty, and it'll have some residual sweetness. These are all bottle conditioned, by the way. Triple is going to be light in color, higher in alcohol, between 9 and 10, and a little bit drier, all things considered. Quadruple will be in between the two in color, but stronger than any of them, and generally speaking, pretty malty, pretty intense. Pretty big. I think. Are you having it? Well, I can't ask that, can I? Because it's blind. This is a good question. Best Belgian beers made in the States. That's a very short list, I'm sad to say. I wish there were more of them. I like the beers of Russian River. I think they make some pretty good Belgian-style beers. Ommegang is absolutely without parallel. They do an excellent job with their Belgian beers. Most Belgian beers in the States are not fermented out far enough. Who else? Name out some other ones. Allagash, yeah. Anything else? Which one?
New Belgium.
No. What are some key similarities and differences between German and Belgian beers? I think we talked about that a little bit. And finally, why do the monks make such good beer? That's an easy one to answer, but they don't have much else to do. The monk day starts at 4:30 in the morning. I've stayed at La Trappe Monastery a couple times, and we go to that service. So they get up at 4:30. It's hard to avoid it because they ring the bell, and there's nothing going on in the monastery. So you're sleeping, you ring the bell, you get up, you get dressed, you go to the church, and they have a service at 4:30, and then you go eat breakfast, and then you have a service, and then you go do some work, and then you have a service. They have services 6 times a day, or is it 7? I lose track. So between the services in the afternoon, what they need to do is earn their keep, and that's when they have historically engaged in brewing of beer. Now, part of my role as an educator in the beer world is to crush your hopes and dreams, and that's what we're going to do right now. Yeah, Halverson, we're gonna kill some dreams. Now, all of the Trappist monasteries, the brewer themselves are not monks. And I don't bring this up just to make you sad, because it really made me sad, and I struggled with this for a long time. But there's an answer to that. And this is going to be, I promise you, you're going to have beer in a minute. I'm going to be done after this. Father Isaac from La Trappe was visiting a couple of years ago, and he got asked this question in a room. It's like, why don't you guys brew anymore? Why is it lay people brewing? And he said something, and I cringed, because I've had the same question, but I didn't have the guts to ask him. He's a very imposing guy. He's about that tall, has an iPhone in his habit, which that'll blow your mind a little bit. Walking around, he's got his sandals on, and like, do-do-do. Oh, hold on, I need to answer my iPhone. So Father Isaac there was a moment of silence, and I sucked in a little bit of air thinking, oh my God, I hate the fact that question was asked. It makes me so uncomfortable, but I really want to know what the answer is. And he said something that struck me as getting to the very heart of what it means to be a Trappist brewery. And he said, never forget, as a monk, our job is to pray. Our job is to study. Our job is to live with God. That's our primary job. We do the other things to enable us to do that. Now, the room was very quiet at this point because no one expected that. It had been a very freewheeling sort of event. And he kind of settled everybody down. And he said, for us to be effective selling beer, we need to make beer that people want to buy. I cannot do my job, which is, again, to pray and to study and to live with God, and the other one both equally well. So for us to continue to make beer and for us to continue to do our main job, we need help. We need people from the community to come and help us. We need people that know how to brew, how to build a brewery. Technically, we need people that can come in and do a good job so that we can continue to do our main job. And I believe I jumped up and gave him a high five, because that is the answer. And that gets to the heart of what this we throw around the idea of Trappist like it's just another beer style, oh, pale ale, oh, Trappist, whatever. And the fact of the matter is, and I'm coming full circle to what I said at the beginning of this, every beer that you try is made by a person. It's made by someone who's doing the very best that they can to make something that you will enjoy. And with the Trappist, there's an added component to this, because not only do they support themselves with the money that they make from selling beer, they also support the community. And I could tell stories about that all day. Visit a Trappist monastery, try to get there at some point in your life with open eyes and see really what's going on. And you'll see that that's where that style of beer, that whole sort of tradition comes from. It's a very beautiful place. So if there are no other questions, I'm going to let you get on with your day and have more beer. But thank you for being an attentive audience. I appreciate your time. Have a great day today.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, absolutely. Wow. One more time, Laney Hoff. Sir Laney Hoff, sorry. Okay, so now that you're all educated on Belgium, who's thirsty? So you guys will have tasting sheets here in front of you. We're going to open this up to the first segment, which is going to be 1 through 6. So we encourage you to talk amongst your peers, think about those flavors. Just write down your best guess. For your guess, you're going to get 1 point. If you correctly guess the actual beer, then you'll get 5 points. So, and then at the end of all this, we're going to tally everything up. The winner's going to go home with a super cool prize. It's not a trip to Belgium. That's going to be reserved for the random for the raffle. But we do have a really cool laser etched Brubical brought to you from the guys of Brubical. Really nice storage box for your beers, and it's laser etched with the BBS logo on there. And inside, there's going to be some goodies, West E12, and some other stuff. But go ahead and write. These beers are going to be coming around. Ask for your servers. Just go ahead and indicate whether you want number 1, number 4, number 5, what have you, and then we'll keep going through. In about another 45 minutes, we'll open up the next segment. So if you have any questions throughout the day, feel free to just ask us. But I'd like to introduce my associate, Pat Fahey, to introduce the first segment. Pat?
So, how are you guys doing so far? Come on, how are you guys doing so far? That's better. So I'm going to talk to you guys about the first flight of beer that's coming out. I'm going to not talk as much as Lanny because I'm not as charismatic. But what you guys are going to be doing, as Rob just explained, is selecting or trying to guess at what styles or what style the beer is that you're drinking, and then what the actual identity of the beer is. This first flight comes 3 pale-ish styles of beer. There's going to be 6 beers in the flight, and I'm not going to tell you how many of each there are, so you'll just have to figure that out for yourself. But the beers are going to be Saison, Wit Beer, and Triple. I wasn't here for all of Lanny's talk, so I don't know how much he talked about each of those styles, so I'll cover each of them briefly. But as I did hear Lanny say, ad nauseum, Belgian beer is about the yeast, so a lot of these styles are going to be defined by their yeast character. First, Saison. Saison means season in French. It was originally brewed for the summer months to be light and refreshing for the French and Belgian farmhands. But today it's evolved to be a little bit higher in alcohol. Still, it's very, very dry. Like Lanny was saying, most Belgian beers should be extremely well attenuated or fully fermented, as he called it. So what you're going to be looking for in Saisons is it's probably going to be a little bit hoppier than most Belgian beer styles. Some are brewed with wheat, some are brewed with spices. The yeast character in these ranges from white pepper to being kind of just generally funky, and super refreshing. The second beer style is also kind of falls under that farmhouse type of style, and that's a Belgian wit. For those of you who are familiar with Blue Moon, that is a poor imitation of a Belgian wit beer. But it's the same general idea. They're brewed with orange peel and coriander, so they'll have some light citrus notes, and then they're also going to be extremely pale, cloudy, but still dry, crisp, sometimes a bit of acidity, very refreshing. The last style, Triple, is one of those traditionally Trappist or Abbey styles, as Lanny described. Triple is pale in color. It's 7.5 to 9.5% alcohol. Also going to be a little bit more highly hopped than most other Belgian styles, but not highly hopped in the way that you think of like an American IPA or anything like that. Triples are extremely well attenuated, so extremely dry. They generally use sugar in the malt bill to allow it to fully ferment and dry out. And yeah, that's about all I've got on the beer styles for this round. Like I said, I want to make sure that you guys get to start drinking and stop listening to me. Talk amongst yourselves, drink some good beers, enjoy.